I never imagined that after 63 years of working, saving, sacrificing, and putting family first, I would be standing in my own kitchen being told to leave like an unwanted guest. The house smelled of fresh coffee that morning, the same way it had every day for the past 22 years. Yet something felt off. My daughter-in-law, Melissa, stood across the counter from me, arms folded, lips curled into a smile that wasn't friendly at all. My son, Eric, sat at the table scrolling through his phone, pretending not to hear what was coming. "Go ahead," Melissa said calmly, tapping her manicured nails against the marble countertop. "If you're so brave, just leave. Let's see how long you survive without us." The words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. She wasn't angry. She was confident. That was what scared me. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment insult. This was something she'd rehearsed. I looked at Eric, waiting for him to say something, anything. He didn't. He didn't even look up. That silence told me more than any argument ever could. 22 years earlier, this house had been nothing but a dusty plot of land. I bought it after selling my small construction business, planning a place where my wife and I would grow old together. When she passed away from cancer 9 years ago, this house became my anchor. I let Eric and Melissa move in temporarily after their wedding, just until they got back on their feet. Temporary turned into years. I paid the mortgage, the property taxes, the insurance. I covered groceries, utilities, even helped with their car payments when Eric lost his job. Slowly, subtly, the tone changed. It started with small comments. "Dad, you don't really need the master bedroom anymore. Maybe you shouldn't be involved in household decisions. This is our family now." I told myself it was nothing. I told myself families adjust. What I didn't realize was that while I was adjusting, they were planning. Melissa stepped closer now, lowering her voice. "You depend on us," she said. "You need help. You need structure. Without us, you'd fall apart in a week." I noticed how carefully she chose her words. Not we, but us. Not maybe, but would. She had already decided how my story ended. I felt something shift inside me then. Not anger, not fear, clarity. I glanced around the kitchen. The renovated cabinets I'd paid for, the appliances I bought, the table my wife and I had eaten at every night for 2 decades. Eric finally looked up. "Dad, maybe you should cool off," he muttered. "Melissa's just being honest." Honest. That word echoed louder than the insult. I realized in that moment that if I argued, if I defended myself, if I begged, I would lose. They wanted a scene. They wanted proof that I was weak, dependent, emotional. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I nodded, slowly, calmly. "You're right," I said. Melissa blinked, thrown off by my tone. "I'll leave." Eric frowned. "Wait, what?" I walked to the drawer by the door, opened it, and took out the house keys, the same keys I'd carried since the day this place was built. I placed them gently on the kitchen counter, right between Melissa's perfectly folded arms. "I won't be a burden," I said. "You won't hear from me." Melissa's smile widened victorious. "That's the best," she said. I picked up my jacket, the one my wife had bought me years ago, and walked out the front door without another word. No shouting, no threats, no tears. As I stepped into my truck, my phone buzzed. A message from Melissa. "Make sure you take your things by tonight." I stared at the screen, then turned the engine on. They thought this was the end of me. They thought bravery meant staying and fighting. What they didn't know, what I hadn't told them, was that leaving was the first move, and I had already made a call they'd never see coming. I didn't drive far after leaving the house, just far enough to clear my head. I parked near the edge of a quiet industrial lot where my old construction company used to operate before I sold it years ago. The place was mostly empty now, but it reminded me of who I had been before I let grief and guilt soften my edges. I sat in my truck with the engine off, watching my breath fog the windshield, replaying Melissa's words over and over. "You won't survive without us." It was strange how calm I felt. No shaking hands. No racing heart. Just a steady resolve I hadn't felt in a long time. I reached into my glove compartment and pulled out a worn leather folder. Documents I kept out of habit more than intention. Inside were copies of the house deed, insurance papers, and a trust summary my lawyer had prepared years earlier at my wife's insistence. Just in case, she had said. At the time, I thought she was being dramatic. Now, sitting alone in that truck, I realized she'd been careful, smarter than I gave her credit for. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Eric. Dad, Melissa didn't mean it like that. You didn't have to actually leave. I didn't reply. 5 minutes later, another message came through. Where are you staying? Still nothing from me. Silence can be louder than anger, and I wanted them to feel it. I drove to a small extended stay hotel on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, but clean and quiet. The clerk didn't ask questions. I paid for a week up front. As I carried my bag into the room, I noticed how light it was. 22 years in that house, and all I needed fit in one duffel. That alone told me how little of it had ever really been mine in their eyes. That evening, as I sat on the bed staring at the blank wall, my phone rang again. This time it was Melissa. I let it ring. Then she texted, "You forgot your medication." I almost laughed. She had never once reminded me before. That message wasn't concern, it was control. I waited an hour before responding. "I'm fine." Her reply came instantly. "You're not fine. You need help. We were trying to protect you." Protect. That word again. Everyone who wanted something from me always said that word. I turned the phone face down and reached for my laptop. There was one call I had promised myself I wouldn't make unless things truly fell apart. I typed the number from memory and pressed call. David Klein speaking. A familiar voice answered. "David," I said quietly, "it's been a long time." There was a pause, then a soft chuckle. "I was wondering when you'd call," he said. David had been my lawyer for over 30 years. He'd handled the sale of my business, my estate planning, and the trust my wife had insisted on creating shortly before she passed. We hadn't spoken in almost a year. "I think my family just kicked me out of my own house," I told him. David didn't sound surprised. "Did you hand over the keys?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "Good," he said. "That makes things simpler." His calm response unsettled me. "Simpler how?" I asked. "Because possession and ownership aren't the same thing," he said. "And from what I remember, you never transferred ownership to anyone." My grip tightened around the phone. "They act like it's theirs," I said. David sighed. "People act confident when they think they've already won," he replied. "Tell me exactly what happened." I explained everything. The comments, the pressure, the challenge to leave. I didn't sugarcoat it. When I finished, there was a long silence. "They've made a mistake," David finally said. "Several, actually." He told me to email him copies of every document I had, and not to communicate with Eric or Melissa for the next 48 hours. "Let them get comfortable," he said. "People reveal their true intentions when they think the threat is gone." After the call ended, I sat there in the quiet room, listening to the hum of the air conditioner. For the first time since my wife died, I felt like someone was standing beside me again. The next morning, I woke up to 8 missed calls and a string of messages. Melissa wanted to know where the mortgage payment information was. Eric asked about the property tax bill. One message stood out. "Dad, the bank called. Something's wrong with the account." I stared at that line for a long moment, then closed my eyes. The panic had started sooner than I expected. They had told me to leave if I was brave. I had, and now, less than 24 hours later, they were already realizing what bravery actually cost them. By the third morning, the silence I created had turned into noise on their end. My phone vibrated constantly on the small desk in the hotel room, lighting up with missed calls and unread messages. I didn't need to read them to know the tone had shifted. Confidence had given way to confusion, and confusion was quickly becoming fear. I finally checked my email instead. David had already replied. "I've reviewed the documents. You still own the house outright. The trust is active. They have no legal claim." I leaned back in the chair and let out a slow breath I hadn't realized I was holding. For years, I let Eric and Melissa behave as if ownership was something you could take by attitude alone. The truth was colder and far less forgiving. Ownership was ink on paper, signatures, dates, and intent, and every one of those favored me. David followed up with instructions. He had contacted the bank to freeze the joint household account, the one I'd foolishly allowed Eric access to after his temporary job loss. Legally, the money was mine. Emotionally, I'd treated it like family funds. That illusion was now over. Within hours, the utilities account, insurance payments, and mortgage autopay were rerouted to a holding account under my control. Nothing illegal, nothing dramatic, just order being restored. That afternoon, Melissa finally sent a message that dropped the performance. Why can't we access the account? No greeting, no pretense of concern, just frustration. I didn't answer. An hour later, another message followed. Eric says the bank told him to contact you. I could almost hear her pacing the living room I used to sit in every evening. By nightfall, Eric called again. This time I answered. "Dad," he said quickly, voice tight. "Something's wrong. The mortgage didn't go through." I waited a beat before speaking. "That's because I pay it," I replied. Silence. "What do you mean?" he asked. I said evenly. The house was never transferred to you. I've been paying for everything. Always. His breath caught. Melissa thought a lot of things. I interrupted gently. She thought confidence was ownership. She thought intimidation was leverage. He didn't respond. I could hear murmuring in the background, Melissa's voice, sharp and urgent. "Dad," Eric said again, lowering his voice, "we need to talk. Come home." The word home landed strangely now. "I don't think that's a good idea," I said. "Why not?" he asked, frustration creeping in. "Because last time I was there," I replied, "I was told to leave if I was brave." I ended the call before he could respond. That night, I slept better than I had in years. The next morning, David called with an update. They contacted me. He said, "Your daughter-in-law," specifically. I smiled faintly. "And?" She wanted to know what options they had. He continued. I told her the truth. They can vacate voluntarily, or we proceed formally. Formally, I repeated. Eviction, David clarified. The word felt heavy, but not cruel. Eviction wasn't revenge. It was consequence. David advised patience. Let them sit with it for a day, he said. Fear makes people careless. He was right. By evening, Melissa's messages took on a new tone. We may have said things we didn't mean. Then, Eric is really stressed. Finally, we're family. We shouldn't be doing this through lawyers. I didn't respond to any of it. Family, to her, meant access without accountability. I spent that evening going through old photos on my phone. My wife smiling in front of the unfinished house. Eric, as a teenager holding a hammer, proud to help. I wonder when respect had been replaced with entitlement. The next morning, David forwarded me an email Melissa had sent him directly. It was long, emotional, and carefully worded. She claimed concern for my health, confusion about the paperwork, and a desire to resolve things peacefully. David's response was short and professional. My client is open to a peaceful resolution. Please vacate the property within 14 days. 14 days. When I read that, my phone buzzed again. A single message from Eric. Dad, please. She's scared. I stared at the words for a long time before typing my reply. So was I when you said nothing. I set the phone down and walked to the window. Somewhere across town, they were realizing the truth. The man they thought was powerless had simply been quiet. And quiet men don't bluff. They plan. The day after David sent the 14-day notice, the atmosphere shifted again. Panic had burned off, leaving something far more dangerous in its place. Desperation. I could feel it in the sudden politeness of messages, the carefully chosen words, the attempts to rewrite the past. Melissa stopped texting directly and started sending messages through Eric instead, as if changing the messenger would soften the meaning. Dad, Melissa's really worried about you. She feels terrible about how things came out. Can we just talk in person? Each message tried to pull me back into a role they were comfortable with. The forgiving father, the quiet man who would rather smooth things over the make waves. That man no longer existed. I spent that morning with David in his office, a space that smelled faintly of old books and polished wood. He laid everything out clearly, the way only someone detached from emotion can. They assumed dependency, he said, sliding a folder across the desk. When you removed it, their leverage disappeared. Inside the folder were printed copies of recent activity, messages, calls, and even requests Melissa had made to bank, attempting to change account access without my authorization. That won't help her case, I said. David shook his head. It already doesn't. As I left the office, my phone rang. It was Melissa. I hesitated, then answered. Hello. Her voice cracked immediately. I just want to clear the air, she said, sounding smaller than I'd ever heard her. We were under a lot of stress. I listened without interrupting. She talked about finances, pressure, misunderstandings. Not once did she apologize for telling me to leave. When she finally paused, I spoke. You challenged me to leave, I said calmly. I accepted. I didn't think you would, she admitted. There was the truth stripped bare. That's not my responsibility. I replied. Her tone sharpened. So you're really to throw us out? No, I said. I'm asking you to leave my house. The distinction mattered. She scoffed. After everything we've done for you? I almost laughed. You mean after everything I paid for? I asked. Silence. She hung up. That evening, David called again. She tried something else. He said, filed a complaint suggesting elder neglect. My stomach tightened. Will it stick? Not for a second, he replied, but it tells me she's out of options. 2 days later, I received notice that a welfare check had been requested. A uniformed officer knocked on my hotel room door, polite and professional. I answered his questions calmly, showed him my medication, my check and receipt, and my lawyer's card. He nodded, satisfied. Looks like you're doing just fine, sir, he said before leaving. I called David immediately after. She's escalating. I said, yes, he replied. And that's exactly why we're documenting everything. On the 6th day, they invited me to dinner. Eric sent the message himself. Please, no lawyers, just us. I declined. The invitation wasn't about reconciliation. It was about control. They needed me in a room, emotional, off balance. Instead, I stayed put. The following morning, David forwarded me another email. Melissa had requested an extension on the 14 days, citing hardship. David denied it. The clock keeps ticking, he told me. That afternoon, I drove past the house for the first time since I left. I didn't stop. I didn't go inside. I simply slowed down. I saw boxes on the porch, a moving truck in the driveway. Melissa stood near the door, arms crossed, arguing with a man in a clipboard. Eric sat on the steps, head in his hands. They looked smaller somehow. Not weaker, just exposed. For a brief moment, I felt something close to pity. Then I remembered the kitchen, the folded arms, the smirk. Leave if you're brave. I kept driving. That night, as I packed my things in the hotel room, my phone buzzed one last time. A message from David. Tomorrow will be the final step. I didn't ask what he meant. I already knew. The house wasn't just coming back to me. The truth was about to come with it. The final step came sooner than I expected. Early the next morning, David called before I'd even finished my coffee. They moved out overnight, he said. There was no triumph in his voice, only confirmation. Keys were left on the counter. Utilities are being transferred back to your sole name as we speak. I closed my eyes for a moment and let the words settle. After weeks of tension, the quiet felt unreal. There's one more thing, David added. Melissa attempted to remove items from the house that don't belong to her. What kind of items? I asked. Documents, he replied. Financial records. Old contracts. Fortunately, the security company flagged unusual activity. Everything is logged. My wife had insisted on installing that system years ago. Another quiet decision paying dividends long after she was gone. I drove to the house that afternoon with David on speakerphone. The front door opened easily. Inside, The rooms echoed. Furniture was gone. Walls were bare where photos once hung. It felt less like abandonment and more like a reset. I walked slowly from room to room, touching familiar door frames, remembering birthdays, arguments, quiet evenings. In the study, I found what David had warned me about: drawers pulled open, file cabinets disturbed. They had been searching for leverage until the very end. "We'll inventory everything," David said, "and we'll address the attempted removal formally." I didn't need him to elaborate. Consequences were already in motion. As I stepped back into the kitchen, my phone buzzed. A message from Eric. "She's gone to her sister's." I don't know what to do. I stared at the screen for a long time. This wasn't panic anymore. It was collapse. "You should speak to your own lawyer," I typed back. It was the first advice I'd given him in years that didn't come with a safety net. The next few days passed quietly. David handled the paperwork, the formal notices, the follow-up regarding Melissa's false complaint. The welfare check report was closed with no findings. The bank confirmed no unauthorized transfers had occurred. What Melissa had attempted now existed as a record, not dramatic, not explosive, just undeniable. On the fourth day, David called again. "She wants to settle," he said. "She's offering a written apology and a non-disparagement agreement. What does she want in return?" I asked. "Nothing," he replied. "She just wants us to stop." I considered it. An apology wouldn't restore trust. Silence wouldn't erase what had happened. But documentation had its value. "Draft it," I said, "on my terms." When the document arrived, I read it carefully. Melissa admitted to overstepping, acknowledged my sole ownership of property, and agreed not to pursue further claims. Her signature sat at the bottom, neat and controlled, as if even surrender needed to look composed. I signed last. That evening, I stayed in the house alone for the first time in years. No tension, no footsteps overhead, no conversations cut short when I entered the room. I sat at the kitchen table and listened to the hum of the refrigerator. Peace as a sound. Eric called late that night. I almost didn't answer. "Dad," he said quietly, "I messed up." I let him speak. He talked about pressure, denial, how easy it had been to let someone else make decisions for him. When he finished, I spoke slowly. "You didn't lose the house," I said. "You lost your voice the moment you stayed silent." He didn't argue. "What happens now?" he asked. "That depends on what you learn from this." I replied. The next morning, I met David one last time that week. "You handled this well," he said. "You didn't retaliate. You corrected." As I drove away, I realized he was right. Revenge wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It simply restored balance and left others to live with what they'd revealed. Back at the house, I opened the windows and let fresh air move through rooms that had held too much tension for too long. The challenge they'd thrown at me, "Leave if you're brave," had never been about leaving at all. It had been about whether I knew my worth without asking for permission. And now, with the house quiet and my name back where it belonged, there was only one thing left to do. The house didn't feel like it used to, and that was a good thing. For the first time since my wife passed, the silence inside these walls wasn't heavy. It was clean, intentional. I spent the morning going through what remained, deciding what to keep and what to let go. Some rooms held memories that deserved space. Others needed to be emptied completely. By noon, I'd made a decision that surprised even me. I wasn't going to stay. Not the way I had before. I called a realtor recommended by David, a woman who specialized in discreet sales. No open houses. No signs in the yard. I want it handled quietly, I told her. "Of course," she replied. Within days, the listing went live privately. The market responded faster than I expected. Offers came in above asking. Apparently, location and timing still mattered. I accepted one that felt fair and final. When Eric found out, he didn't argue. "I understand," he said simply. That was new. Melissa didn't reach out at all. Her silence was the last confirmation I needed. The sale closed 3 weeks later. Standing in the empty living room with the keys in my hand for the final time, I felt no regret, just release. I drove straight to the bank and finalized what my wife and I had planned years ago. The trust was updated. Charities she cared about were funded. A portion was set aside for Eric, conditional, structured, and protected from anyone else's influence. Responsibility, this time, came with boundaries. That evening, I checked into a small coastal rental I'd booked months earlier, but never planned to use. Ocean air moved through the open windows, carrying the sound of waves instead of arguments. I slept deeply that night. Weeks passed. Life settled into a rhythm I'd forgotten was possible. Morning walks, quiet dinners, conversations chosen, not endured. One afternoon, an envelope arrived. No return address. Inside was a single page, the signed apology David had mentioned, now notarized. No note, no explanation, just acknowledgement. I placed it in a drawer and closed it without reading it again. Some victories don't need revisiting. Eric visited once, alone. We talked, carefully, about mistakes, about silence, about the cost of letting others speak for you. When he left, there were no promises, just understanding. That was enough. Months later, I ran into Melissa by chance at a grocery store miles from the old neighborhood. She looked past me as if I were a stranger. I returned the favor. The moment passed without words, without tension. Power, I'd learned, doesn't need recognition. It only needs resolve. On my last evening at the coast, I sat on the balcony watching the sun sink into the water. I thought about that morning in the kitchen, about folded arms and careless confidence. Leave if you're brave. I smiled. I had left. I had been brave. Not because I fought, but because I knew when to walk away and what to take with me. Not furniture. Not walls. Control. Dignity. Peace. The kind of revenge that doesn't shout, doesn't gloat, and doesn't ask for approval. The kind that simply moves on, leaving others to live in the echo of the choice they thought was power.